My game of the day from round 2 of the London Chess Classic is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with white against Hikaru Nakamura with black. With two such theoretical experts and two players who are very comfortable in sharp positions, we could hope for an exciting clash and an interesting opening, and that's exactly what we got, as Nakamura played the dragon variation, which is quite a rare guest at the top levels, probably because it's so sharp that one slip and you can just wave goodbye to your position. Maxime very happy to play the real test of the opening, the so-called Yugoslav attack. Now here is a big divide in the theory. White can either play bishop c4 or you can castle queenside. That's been the most popular move over the last, well, 10-15 years. I mean, this particular line was very popular in English chess circles. English Grandmaster Gawain Jones is a particular expert in this line with black. And here, instead of the old move e5 to take and play queen b6, white's supposed to be better, but it's complicated. But Nakamura obviously has done his homework. But instead of that, Vachier-Lagrave played bishop c4, so this is very much the old main line of the Yugoslav attack. So black shouldn't allow the pawn to go any further. h5. I mean, I was analysing this line 25-30 years ago, and suddenly to have this on the board again, it seems, you know, I mean, I've forgotten almost everything about this. But even then, you know, I found it simply too sharp that you know, your position could just go downhill very quickly if you didn't know what you were doing. I mean, this is a really well-known position. These moves might look a bit obscure, like rook c5. Basically, it's preparing to double on the c file, perhaps with queen c8, sometimes queen c7, and the rook prepares perhaps the pawn coming to b5 as well. Of course, that protects it. Rook e8 this looks a slightly bizarre move, but if the queen moves, then it means that e7 is protected, so it means that takes and knight d5 has less effect. It's a standard move in this position. And here is a big divide. I mean, I remember being in New York for the 1995 World Championship match, Anand against Kasparov at the top of the World Trade Center. Incredible to think. And Anand here played rook he1 against Kasparov. I mean, that even then in '95, that felt as though this was an old opening system for Kasparov to play, and it was a real surprise. You can also play bishop h6 here, as Karyakin did against Carlsen in the game in 2014. I think that shows that, you know, with these big names playing this particular line for black, you know, it is probably sound to do so. Certainly, you know, when as I haven't looked at this position for a long time, but when I check this line with computers, they actually think that black is doing okay here. Maxime played perhaps the sharpest of all the moves, g4, immediately attempting to open the king side, and after this capture f4, so that now this introduces the possibility of f5 or h5 coming to open up the king side. But it looks as though black has sufficient counterplay with knight c4. This has been played before and in several games, and previously queen e2 has been played, but although it's been quite successful, in fact, after queen e2, knight a5, curious to switch this knight around again, targeting the bishop. Actually, the computers think this position is satisfactory for black. In any case, Maxime played queen d3, attacking the knight. And here, again, this is a position that's been reached before in several games, and black has been very successful with queen c8. Here, Nakamura thought for over 50 minutes. So he obviously was unhappy with something in his preparation. By the way, he said afterwards that he'd actually prepared this line for Vachier-Lagrave for the Palmer FIDE Grand Prix tournament, but didn't get to use it. So yeah, that's why he played it again today. But yes, Queen C8, just obviously supporting the knight, but also preventing F5. You know, the Queen adds a bit more firepower along the diagonal. That's quite important, actually. It can just be taken. And Black has done extremely well from this position. But Nakamura came up with Knight A5, which looks very odd to move the knight again. And, well, the computers still think that Black is okay, unbelievably, but now it starts to get tricky. And I have to say, you know, looking at this position with a human eye, it looks extremely difficult for Black already. First things first, if bishop takes bishop, then e5 is very difficult, because after pawn takes, here's the point, queen takes g6, remember the pin here. I mean, Black can still play knight takes, but you know, this looks better for white. There are too many pieces on prise, should be better for white. So therefore, e takes f6, which looks a bit ugly. So from a positional point of view, looks very nice. White could play f5 here, but Vachier-Lagrave played in a very, well, positional way, you could say, keeping that bishop. Incredibly, the computers think Black is all right here, but it wants to play this move. The computer likes f5, an unbelievable move, and then to follow up with this extraordinary move, bishop c6, which looks completely daft to me. I mean, no human would play this. And the point is that after this trade, let me just show you what the computer thinks. Again, this, I mean, it looks very odd to give your kingside pawns away like this. But basically, it thinks that Black has enough play here to hold a draw. There's enough play here, and you know, the king is also open. Probably, you know, reach a drawn rook and pawn endgame. But I mean, this is not human chess. Naka played knight c6, and here definitely the best move is knight b5, and white is has a very, very promising position. The d6 pawn is vulnerable. I mean, this rook looks very odd somehow. Positionally, it's great for white. But instead, Vachier-Lagrave was tempted by a very forcing continuation. He took on c6 and then took on f7. Very, very interesting. And he thought, well, and again, this looks, from a human point of view, it looks very promising. One, you know, opens the king to a certain extent, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. But Nakamura had calculated very, very deeply here. In fact, there's more than one decent continuation for Black. Rook h5 is very interesting, simply heading into an endgame, and Black has sufficient play here because this pawn provides counterplay. These pawns are a little bit loose. There's the possibility to play sometimes f5, sometimes g5. You see that white king is too far away to help protect these pawns. So Black is all right there as well. But Nakamura had seen something else, and this is absolutely remarkable. Rook takes knight. So if this is captured, then, well, Black is then absolutely fine. You can just protect the bishop. So queen takes check. And now king e6 looked very odd, because at first glance you think rook d1, perfect. This threatens checkmate, threatens the rook. White is simply winning. But here Nakamura had seen further. Bishop f8 is possible. This wasn't the game continuation, by the way. Vachier-Lagrave did not play rook ht1, but let me show you this. This is remarkable. Looks as though white is just an exchange up. But now comes check. Now the king can't come this way. because we give a check, take the rook, so the king has to go in the corner, and the dragon bishop comes good, just hitting this weakness here. So the threat is simply to deliver perpetual check, and this is white's best. So best continuation is this, and draw by perpetual check. Incredible. If white goes for more with, say, rook d8, wanting to trade rooks, and yeah, if the rook moves, well, okay, there's stuff going on here, but basically black can take and bishop c1, and suddenly black is better here. This pawn becomes very, very powerful, and white's king is just in Siberia. So very, very complicated. Coming back to this position, instead of rook d1, then Vachier-Lagrave had to take the bishop. Now, if we count the pawns, white is a pawn up here, but actually black has sufficient counterplay because white's pawns are quite vulnerable, and black's king is able to support a passed pawn on the king side. So, you know, this, I mean, there are various ways to liquidate here, but this is very plausible. So after this trade of pawns and rooks, white is still a pawn up, but this pawn provides counterplay. Passed pawns should be pushed, and Nakamura is very consistent in his strategy. There are a few finesses here, but the basic story is this king is too far away, and black has sufficient counterplay. King comes across. I mean, maybe it's Nakamura just took here. Maybe it's even clearer just to cut the rook. But anyway, what Nakamura did was good enough for a draw. Maybe the best that white has here is to head for this endgame, but this should be a draw. The black king will come across, and too few pawns on the board. Instead, Vachier-Lagrave attempted to go for more. So he's bringing the rook behind here, but black has sufficient counterplay. The king is able to support the pawn. Turns into a bit of a race, but black's f-pawn gets there first. So they've repeated the position, so Vachier-Lagrave steams these forward, but now, although it looks very scary, in fact in these positions it's absolutely fine. And after king takes c6, they agreed a draw. It would have been nice to see the game played out, but let me show you. A plausible continuation. Check. Now the important thing is to get the king back, and black's rook is in the perfect position here, behind the pawn, and then black's king is in time to stop that pawn and indeed take that pawn. So there we go, a draw. So yeah, good technique from Nakamura at the end to force the draw. And I think his decision to play this incredibly sharp line of the dragon was certainly justified. These positions are so complicated that in practice it's very hard to play perfectly. You know, the computer shows you what to do afterwards, but in a practical human game it's very, very difficult to play. And you know, it's great to see Nakamura playing such sharp and risky chess. In fact, you know, both players, Maxime also really played uncompromisingly in the opening and afterwards as well. However, another draw, and in fact all 5 games in round 2 were drawn just like in round 1. But I'm sure things are going to break soon.